folks. Welcome to the Kaiju Lounge, your home for humor, opinions, and nerd shit. And my guest tonight is the senior outreach lead for comics at the crowdfunding site Kickstarter and has over 17 years in the comics industry with more than 14 successful Kickstarter projects under his belt. So you'd think we'd be talking about comics, but no! His tabletop RPG Henshin, a Sentai RPG, has successfully been funded and made its way into the homes of all its backers. Please take a look.
If you don't already know what Henshin is, or Sentai at all, it's a genre that follows a group of brightly colored heroes as they balance fighting to save the world and living their lives. This is primarily a genre that exists in Japan, but you might be familiar with American adaptations like Power Rangers or Big Bad Beetleborgs.
We both grew up loving this media and wanted to find a vehicle for telling stories in that vein. Gaming seemed like the right medium, but we couldn't find anything out there that really fit our needs, so we made something that's accessible and fun for all kinds of gamers.
When you play Henshin, you aren't spending any time calculating hit points or rolling dice. The game focuses on simple social mechanics to move the story forward, emphasize character development, and of course, fight monsters. Let's take a look at how that works. Shall we?
Please welcome my guest at this time, Sam Kusek. Sam, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Noah. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being on. I appreciate this. We are filming this in November, and last time I saw you was in person at New York Comic Con, and I'm going to ask you the same question I ask most people I see at cons, especially since there's nothing else topical within this month I really want to talk about, and that is, how was the rest of your con?
It was wonderful. I think I saw you sort of like early to mid convention.
I think it was Friday we met up. Yeah, maybe Thursday, but yeah, it was definitely the first half.
And it was great. I'm of the age now where my conventions were like I'm of a certain age and I got sober in the last couple of years. So for me, I'm like 11 p.m. I'm out of there, baby. Like I have a lot of meetings during the day. I like that you preface
that as if 11 p.m. was early.
It's relatively early. Well, here's the thing: is I'll run into friends who I think I ran into a friend who I saw Thursday night. I ran into him on Friday, and he was like, "I stayed out till 4," and his staying out till 4 was like, "Let's go to Times Square and like look at all the stuff that's happening." And I was like, "No, man, like I'm in bed. I go home, I take a shower, like I watch a weird movie, and I go to sleep." So I try and keep like a pretty solid barrier, just because my job requires a lot of attention, or I'm meeting, with a lot of folks and friends like yourself. But it was great. I'm trying to think. I always sort of mark cons with like, what was the cool purchase actually, and this is relevant to this conversation. Yeah. So I've been trying to not buy a ton of stuff because I have a bunch of books that I haven't read yet. So I was like, I won't buy a ton of books, but I walked by a booth that had bootleg DVDs, and I was like, oh no. And I got the entire VR Troopers collection.
God. Yes.
I got the entire Spectraman, wow. And then I also got Kamen Rider Amazon. I'm very excited about VR Troopers because I'm I'm a child of the 90s. Power Rangers, right. I'm sure we'll get into, was a big inspiration for me. But I started to collect like a lot more of the offshoots. Like I have Tattooed Teenage Alien Fighters, which I have become kind of a defender of, where I'm like, if you haven't seen it and you're a Power Rangers fan, like give it a chance, because there's some episodes in there that are really that really break the mold in a way that Power Rangers I don't think ever would have dared to do.
Oh, interesting.
At least until later seasons, but obviously like the whole of it is horrendous. Like it's an absolute nightmare. But there are some episodes where you're like, wow, like someone watched Power Rangers and was like, what if we like made this a little more mature and interesting,
right? A little Beverly Hills 90210 mixed in with Power Rangers, which
it's such a weird show, man. It's such a weird show. There's one guy that is clearly inspired by like Jerry Maguire, where it's just like he's all about money. Like his whole thing is like, how can I get rich quick? And like, it's such a strange. I've tried to, and we'll talk about like the game stuff in a moment, but I tried to think of like a hack for Henshin, but it doesn't work because the gist of that show is like none of the characters like each other, and that is
Right.
a point that every episode really drives home with you, where they're like,
Really
hey,
Odd
remember that these people
Couple-esque.
just but it's like we actively dislike each other, but we have to work together. Where Power Rangers is like we're a team. It's all about like camaraderie and sort of overcoming personal issues through your relationships with other
Right.
people, right? And Super Sentai to a degree is that as well. So it's funny to just have something that is like so antithetical to that very core.
That
You
that
know?
sounds crazy because I feel like as like a Netflix drama that would absolutely kill, right? Like go ahead and taking that and making it the like dark and gritty HBO thing, but
Yeah.
as like a '90s, I don't even think it was Saturday morning, like Saturday afternoon, TV show for kids and teens doesn't quite hold up in court in the same way.
Yeah, and it's weird. Like, I totally get the like HBO treatment, and I get the like the desire for a more mature Power Rangers. Right? We had that
Hmm.
fan film that came out however many
Yeah.
years ago, and now like the comics do some of that. Where like Power Rangers: The Return, which I had the opportunity to like be a part of the Kickstarter campaign, that had like Jason's the only surviving guy, sort of still doing it, right? And like
Mm.
his battle armor is all scarred, and like there are cool approaches to it, but honestly, I feel like that only has so much runway. Like that whole dark and gritty Power Rangers concept is so hard to do against like the
Yeah.
bright spandex and sort of the like the kaiju tokusatsu nature of it all. Like it is goofy, it is strange.
Yeah, part of the joy
Yeah,
is the hokiness in a way, and I think to your point, I think this is not just within the Sentai genre, but in general. Look at like the Last Ronin that they did for the Ninja Turtles. The same thing is like,
right.
it's cool idea. It's always fun to see, um, but I think it's run its course to the point where we're now no longer seeing enough of the uh, enough stuff within this. There's more space in the source material in the happy-go-lucky, like upbeat area to mine because we've mined all the stuff that previously exists. Like we need to kind of circle back in the other direction again.
That or like the thing I always kind of come back to because people ask like so I'm a big Power Rangers and Super Sentai fan, and like
Hmm.
I've gotten a chance to know some of the writers of the comic series, and like I've watched pretty much the majority with the exception of a couple of seasons that I don't think I would care for. I've watched the majority of the American Power Rangers stuff, those being Mystic Force and Operation Overdrive. Some of the
Right.
Disney stuff I'm not really there for, but I do think that there's more lore to explore, which is a funny sort of marketing tagline to throw out there. But like, I love Lost Galaxy is one of my favorite seasons, and you never really get into like the alien culture and sort of what is
Hmm.
it like for these characters to sort of become these like embody these animal spirits or these alien animal spirits and participate in this culture, and like we never really talk about how that impacts them as people, and like what is that experience like, like what is the life of the Rangers in RPM like what is their sort of day to
Right.
day like we don't spend too much time in that like downtime, those more quiet moments, and like that is some of the content that I would like to see further explored. I didn't really read The Last Ronin, but from what I saw, and one thing that piqued my interest was like The Last Ronin. I won't spoil it because it's still relatively new. That I think
Yeah.
anyone
Yeah.
who's
Yeah.
like interested in it, I don't want to spoil who the Ronin is. But later on, I think in the second series, a new set of turtles starts getting trained, and like there's this younger sort of set of turtles mirroring the original four. And I'm like, oh, I want to read that. Like, what
Right.
is that?
Right.
Who are those characters? That's kind of that like second generation or set of joy that comes along. I feel like you see that somewhat in Super Sentai or in anniversary seasons where like, an older Sentai character shows up and gives some sort of like I think Megaforce and Super Megaforce did this in Power Rangers, where you saw some existing Rangers show up and like teach lessons, right?
Right.
I think that kind of stuff is really fun, of like paying homage to the past.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like we've all, even the the big two, right? DC and Marvel. DC has done stuff like Batman Beyond, which was a very successful, and I think has continued to have a
Oh
good
yeah.
shelf life afterwards. And then feels like it was very brief, but Marvel had their whole M2 line that had like what if the Marvel universe actually aged, and so you had like the kids of Avengers being the new Avengers, and like I think she's now Arachne, but there was like a Spider-Man's daughter do it. Like they've tried that. I think it's always it's not necessarily a reimagining. It's just it's a natural evolution. I think it's why I've always enjoyed pro wrestling in a lot of ways, because you can't stop that in time. There will
Yeah.
always be that. Characters will always get older, and that's uh fun to watch. I want to go back to something you had brought up, is this idea of exploring both the space, as far like, well, I guess literal space, right, traveling to the planets in the genre, as well as a space emotionally between characters, because you focus a lot on that within Henshin. You focus a lot on, I think one of the most interesting things is one of the modules you have in there is a post-apocalyptic module.
Oh
It's
yeah.
not all just the Sunny Grove stuff there. um, you obviously have a love for the genre, and we'll be getting into everything, but with respects to that specifically, like, what was that what you were trying to explore, not just the bang pow zoom of it all, but really the more, you know, what you'd maybe see when the don't see when the cameras go off in the original Power Rangers. Like what how to really
Yeah.
explore the space.
And yeah, no, thank you for that's a great segue into Henshin and kind of its core not thesis, but like the core identity. I think Henshin is an interesting outlier in the American tokusatsu space, I'll call it, where people expect coming into Henshin that you are going to be able to like track hit points and do cool combos, and like you can do cool action, but everything that you do in Henshin is in service of the story, both from a one-on-one perspective and the story
Mm.
at large, right? The way that Henshin operates is you play a character, you choose a color, and the color has certain choices that you can make that help move the narrative along. So it is very sort of improv, yes and heavy game. There's a game master who will work with you on the choices that you make and give you sort of a natural set of consequences and help give you a result as that is their role, right, to service the larger story. But a lot of this is more driven by some core elements in Super Sentai more than Power Rangers. Jetman, Chojin Sentai Jetman, if folks haven't seen it, is a big, big inspiration for Henshin. Jetman follows a group who's thrust into there's these people who like get hit with a birdonic wave, whatever that is, and they get superpowers, and a lot of the story centers around this like love triangle between many of the characters, and between three of the central characters of the team, and then two characters who are really more focused on their own individual journeys. And watching that season was a huge inspiration because like Akko, the blue hero, a monster is born of her like trash and a bunch of like childhood toys that she's getting rid of, and the monster has all these like residual weird feelings about it, and it's like, why are you throwing me away, we had all these good times together, and she's like, well, I'm growing up, I need to leave away childish things. And the stories are so much more rooted in like emotion and personal growth and like acceptance of who you are and the things that you can offer people, or like the red hero of that series, Ryu, his former girlfriend gets taken in by the enemy group and is changed into a villain. And so he has to fight her and kind of reconcile with this idea that like, I need to help her, but then when she comes back, she's like, I've been a monster this whole time. How can I ever go back to being a human being? There's just all this like really intense emotional flavor in that series that I think is so different than the traditional like, we come in, we fight, and the fight is really the mix where the action moves more of the emotional story along, and that's what we wanted to replicate with Henshin. So all of the choices, in for the most part, either put you in some sort of, well, the way the game operates, to take a step back, is you have heavy turns, regular turns, and light turns. Regular turns just move the story along. They're kind of like, I'm making a choice that doesn't have as much narrative consequence as a light turn or a heavy turn. When you do a light turn, you gain a token, and light turns are meant to sort of put you in further narrative hot water, or maybe right in the center of the action where you could get hit, you could get knocked out of commission, and so you get a reward for putting yourself out there and putting yourself in a situation that's going to change the dynamic of the story. You can spend that token to do heavy turns, so you can really impact somebody's mood or sort of change the course of action in a conversation, or you can transform or summon your mech. Some of those more like fun, exciting, tokusatsu
The
special
big tentpole
things.
moments of each episode kind of thing.
Right. But to do that, you have to have these more sort of core emotional moments. And so there's a narrative push and pull of this. The story really services the action of it, and that's what Henshin is built on, and that's where a lot of the flavor of the modules come from, and just each playbook is suited for a different kind of like emotional journey and exploration. And the cool thing about Henshin that we built into the game is, like, you're actively encouraged to switch colors, as you see sometimes in Power Rangers or Super Sentai. It doesn't happen that often. I wish it would happen a little more, but you can like play a character and be like, cool, I feel like I've done what I want to do with this. And then that character can either go away and come back as a different color. Maybe they change colors through some sort of narrative explanation, or you can have a completely different color character.
Right. It's the Green Ranger to White Ranger, or the black, yellow, and red being replaced through the movie, right? Like, it's one of those kind of things.
Or like, I always loved in SPD. I mean, SPD is kind of an outlier because like there's a more of a system to how those powers work than some of the other seasons. But like, the Red Ranger leaves because he's like, actually, that's a really great example. The Red Ranger there is like, I've sort of found what is actually important to me, and it's not being a cop, to be funny about it. And he leaves, and so then the character who's the blue character for a while, who's wanted to be red the whole time, by the end of the season gets the opportunity to be red, and then you see the green character step into blue. So there's this natural kind of like progression of, hey, or there's opportunity for me to like embody a whole new dynamic, right? And I think that's a fun thing to explore in Sentai as well, of like, what does that do? How does that change? How do those archetypal expectations sort of change your character's look and feel?
That's great. It's funny you bring that up, because I do think of like, I bring up the White Ranger thing, but that truly was, the height of my fandom as a kid was that arc when that happened, and being absolutely obsessed because I thought that storyline was so cool. I mean, those moments help, those are your big campaign changing moments when you see character growth like that, because they're big season and series moments in there. This is not the first RPG you guys have done, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Was this because you have other ones, and I have them here as well? 3 minutes.
So,
and as well as Writer Khonshu, you've got a couple. You've been in this tokusatsu genre for a bit. I also can't help but notice one of these is significantly thicker than the other.
yeah.
Is it just you just had so much more story to tell here within this? You feel just more connected to the Sentai portion of Tokusatsu, or what kind of goes into these various inspirations here?
So Henshin was the first game that I made. So I made this with a guy named Tim Batchick. Tim has since left the company, so pretty much all of the games following, including the expansion, are just me. So there's an element of like, Henshin started out as a 12-page PDF with the playbook, so it was like 6 pages of rules, 6 pages of colors, and I was really adamant about like wanting to expand in the Kickstarter campaign, so we added white, orange, and violet or purple, and then in the expansion we added guest stars, which Henshin already, with 11 playbooks that people can choose from, it's a very like dense game, right? And I didn't want to overload it by adding more characters just kind of for the sake of adding characters, you know what I mean? So the guest stars are meant to be single session guest stars for, like, if you were to visit Portland, Oregon, for instance, and I was running a game, I'd be like, cool, let's have you sit in on a session and you can choose from one of these 7 characters, right? And that would be the only time we would see that person. But they would maybe be referenced later. All the other Tokusatsu games. So Rider Kanchu is a hack of the Henshin system. It operates in a similar token structure, but there's more restriction in the hopes of, or in the service of, interesting gameplay, right? So the way that there's rider characters and supporting characters. So rider characters have the ability to transform, and supporting characters don't generally, and there are items similar to what you would get in a traditional, or a more, I guess, modern Kamen Rider season. There are items that you can collect, and those have like narrative moves and things that you can make. So it's a hack of the Henshin system, trying to touch on more of those Kamen Rider touchstones. And the way that the token economy operates is a bit different, where there's a shared token economy where people can take from a shared pool. So the amount of tokens at one point is more limited, which adds to a more competitive nature. And then 3 minutes is a complete departure. 3 minutes is a hack of another game system called Gun and Slinger, or the game that it apes from is Gun and Slinger, and it is a card system that is Go Fish based. So all of your players are drawing from a central deck, and you use pairs of cards to make moves in lieu of dice, right? And there are mechanics for having 3 of a kind, for having 4 of a kind. But, for me, game design is really this like exploration of system and communication design. I am not a writer by any means. I write great emails. I write great documents that don't really have a I'm not good with like dialogue, right? Or sort of connecting the dots between larger story pieces. But I really like sort of creating experiences where people do have the opportunity to bring their own ideas and their own flavors to the table and do something really unique and different. I was just talking to somebody in our Discord who ran a game of Henshin where people made, the enemy was like subterranean people who are trying to get oil back that we've drilled from their region, right? And the heroes had like crystalline animals that were the inspiration for their heroes. And it's like, oh, that's just like a really interesting, unique take on the story, right? Of like, you can explore environmentalism and just sort of like the awful feelings we have of destroying our planet, and whether or not you want to change tail and be an eco-terrorist.
Really circle the drain and that anxiety while you're at it, but yeah.
Sure. But that's a good example of just like the stuff that I make, and the goal with everything that I make is like, I want to make a system that is rooted in some emotional core play where you can tell a really interesting story, and there are mechanics that are not necessarily meant to just pave the way for somebody to be like a god killer at the end of it. I'm not. I played a lot of D&D. I play with a lot of folks who like love to min-max and love to sort of become the most powerful version of themselves. And I think there is space for that. And I don't mean to say that that is a bad thing. That is not necessarily what I find interesting. Some of my favorite moments in role-playing games come from failure, and come from the fact that like you try to do something and you absolutely whiff it. And the result of it either puts you in like a really interesting position, or you get the opportunity to do something cool as a result of it, right? And that's always my goal with the games, is like there's space to win and fail and do really cool, interesting things, but you're also exploring a character's just like emotional path,
Yeah, and there's always, and I think maybe not everyone will admit this, but there are elements of the therapeutic aspects of RPGs that is fun. whether it's inhabiting
Right.
someone else or just inhabiting a part of you don't get to explore nearly as often. When it comes to game design, like how did you approach coming up with your primary core gameplay for Henshin, right? And like, was it always going to be we're going to make it this way? Like, did that come first? Or were you sitting there be like, maybe we're just doing a source book for something like the Fate system or a pre-existing RPG system instead? Like, what brought you to this?
Um, so when I first moved, I used to live in Los Angeles. I worked
I'm
for Boom
sorry.
Studios. Me too. There's a reason I don't
Yeah,
anymore.
right.
I love visiting. Give me 5 days in Los Angeles. Love visiting, and then I'll want
Yeah.
to go back home. Um, uh, but when I lived in Los Angeles, I worked for Boom Studios, and that was at the time where the Power Rangers books launched. And I was doing direct market sales, so I was selling variant covers and working with the editors to define like what those were going to be and what characters we could and couldn't
Hmm.
utilize. And I just started like watching a shit ton of Power Rangers, right? I got bit by the bug again, where I was like, I haven't engaged with this in a while, and like, let me just do it.
Right.
Um, and when I moved to Portland, I was like, oh, would really like to play role playing games because I tried to do that with some friends and it just never really like went anywhere. And so I went and met this guy Tim, and we started playing more games together. And he introduced me to a lot of different systems that I was unfamiliar with. And I asked him and some other friends, I was like, is there anything, has anyone ever tried to make a game that is like a Power Rangers Super Sentai thing? And nobody had. And so my inkling when I hear that, I is usually like, oh, I'll just do it myself, right? But the game design, in talking more about like what is the core driver with the emotional journey and characters, wanting the ultimate goal is being like a character learns something about themselves and grows. Um, it was easy to look at other systems and say like, well, all of these stats aren't really that applicable to that, right? Because it's like, how does strength sort of roll into that, or how does a dice roll into that? So we really tried to approach it from like a bare bones perspective, and I
Mhm.
believe what Henshin apes, or what it is built on, is a system called belonging outside belonging. Um, that I think I want to say Avery Hill made that. I don't. Let me just look it up. But that was intentionally like diceless, which was a big draw. So yeah, belonging outside belonging influenced a game called our Dream Askew and Dream Apart were two games that were built on top of that. And then you see
Mhm.
some other games like Sleepaway. Um, Alder Avery, sorry, Alder Avery is the name that I was looking for. Um, but yeah, that like realizing, I think for us, and a big part of my game design since Henshin is really realizing more about like what you don't need more than what you need. You know what I mean? Which
Yeah.
is kind of it's a tricky thing to get to, but I feel like that's the experience of like, you need to play a lot of different kinds of games to sort of understand like, these mechanics work really well for this, these mechanics don't work well for this. And that helps you get a better understanding of like the type of game that you play or want to make, and the type of experience that people want to have, right? Um, yeah, yeah. Does that answer that question? I feel like
Yeah.
I sort of went like a roundabout way
It's
to get
okay.
there.
So did my question, so it's totally fine. No, absolutely explains it. Do you have a favorite color in your playtest that you personally like playing or
Mm.
feel personal attachment with?
So when we first made the game, we didn't have green initially, and I pushed for green because I'm sorry to say, and this might change the course of our friendship, I'm not the biggest Tommy Oliver fan, and I
Oh
don't love
wow.
I don't love that the core identification in Power Rangers for green is him. because I think there's a lot of other really strong greens. I am, at time of recording, the highest bidder on the RPM green suit in the Heritage auctions for the Power Rangers action suits. And if I get it, I will have the action suit of my favorite Green Ranger of all time, Ziggy Grover, who
Please let me
is
know. We'll do a follow-up. I need to see that.
It will be behind me the next time we talk. But
Awesome.
Ziggy Grover's a great example where he is just this, like, he starts out in the series as a friend of the Power Rangers and just seems really inept. He's like a gangster who's on the run from the gangs because he tried to like get out of the cartel and they're hunting him down. And he's like great at shadow puppets where you're like, how the hell is that gonna help anybody? But he's this like trickster kind of like, fast talking character who's not traditionally like masculine or good at fighting or something like that. And I really identify with that as somebody who's not a very like traditionally masculine man. And he becomes a hero and becomes a hero in his own ways. And it's a really inspiring story, in my opinion. So I wanted to include green as a result, to have a more non-traditional, just like silly dude or person. Sorry, I have an emotional attachment to all of the pre-made characters that are in Henshin, but they're meant to not be particular characters. But Green's mine, and then I'm trying to think of who from the expansion, because I treat those as sort of separate families a little bit. So the neat thing about the expansion, for those who haven't bought it, and it'll be available, I think in December, I'll make the PDF available. The Kickstarter backers are the only people who will get a printed version of this in the zine format that it came out in. But every one of these characters has a deliberate tie to one of the existing 6 original characters. And then there's a 7th character we added as part of the Kickstarter who is sort of a friend of all the existing characters. But like Gray is supposed to be Pink's grandmother. Brown is like a rival of Black. Copper is supposed to be their like alpha robot.
I remember reading through some of that. Like I thought that was particularly a very clever way of working in these other side characters there. Yeah, play as alpha. That sounds amazing.
Well, you see that. So I think it's Bioman, which is an older Sentai. One of their robots, Peebo, gets involved in the action in some way. So there are instances of like the robot assistant has to see action themselves and like go out onto the battlefield. You never see, I would absolutely love to see Alpha just like transforming, go out and wreck shop.
Yeah,
amazing. Like I think that would be really cool. And that's the experience I wanted to create in the expansion of like, this assistant you've had for a while all of a sudden has this like ass kicking form, and you're like, oh, cool! I had no idea that you could do that. I think those types of experiences are really fun.
That's great. That's great. I want to like slowly switch gears here, and just ask:
Sure.
Do you consider yourself a comics guy who is in RPGs, or an RPG guy who is in comics?
That's a great question. I think I'm more of a comics guy who's in RPGs. And I say that because all of my artists on my projects come from comics. And I think like the inspiration for the look and feel of everything comes from the world of comics. And that has been my backbone in terms of just like how I design things. That is the area that I will look at. That is the content that I engage with more and am exposed to more, where I understand more of the business of how it works and the creators that are at play. I love tabletop RPGs, but I think there was a period of time a couple of years ago where I was really trying to like pivot and make that my career, right? Oni Press was making games and I was like, awesome, there's games and comics. I want to do that. And that didn't really go anywhere because of a bunch of different business things that I won't get into, unrelated to me. And And I thought there was more a viable path there, and I think in some ways there still is, but I think what I've come to realize about games is there's, unlike comics, where there's kind of a very well-defined market where there's clear success metrics for what sells and what doesn't. Um, for games, there is a little bit more of that like Wild West feeling, if that makes sense, where I'm able to put something out that is a bit more like this is about your experience rather than my story I'm trying to tell. And I feel like that has caught a bit more fire for me in the creative stuff I want to do. And I think I've sort of like, rather than try to make products that I think appeal to the larger market, games have allowed me the freedom to creatively explore the things that I'm interested in and the experiences and like weird media that I like. And it feels less consequential than like trying to make a comic, because I think a comic you're really hoping to like have a series run for as long as possible. You're hoping to get picked up by a publisher. You're hoping to like,
it's building an IP versus just a game, right? It's really hoping you can
right.
expand that world into something bigger.
Right. And for the most part, like there's only so much story based on my singular experience that I feel like I can tell. And frankly, I don't feel like I have anything that is so different or worthwhile that I could bring it to the market and find success in the way that like a James Tynion has, or like a Charlie Stickney, or I shouldn't name all I shouldn't name all men, but like like I think like I always think of Rumiko Takahashi as one of the most successful comics creators ever, right? And she's made just like this insane amount of stuff in these insane worlds, and like Ranma alone is so much of a gem. But then you look at Inuyasha, and then like Mason Ikoku is so different than all of those things. Like I don't feel like I have that sort of like depth of storytelling that she has, where she can explore all these different aspects. But I can create a system and a playing field for other people to be able to do things like that. And so I think for me it is like coming to that realization of like my RPG skills fit really nicely into comics, because I am able to sort of like compartmentalize what makes something work, and set that up in a repeatable process for people to be able to consume themselves. And that is just like, I don't know, I think about it in like a TED Talky kind of way, or like a how I work kind of way, of like, you have to, I think, try a bunch of different kinds of things and then sort of realize and accept the stuff that you are good at, and lean into that. And I feel like that's where I am with my game development.
No, that makes sense. When you bring up that I find that Wild West comment you made interesting. Do you think that's a maturity of the industry? Do you think that because comics has been around longer, we've kind of like TV versus digital, right? We've established what the rule set is, whereas maybe in games the rule set's a little bit different, or is it the opposite? Has someone come in and disrupted games enough that now what we define as games is so loose that there's more room to play in? And the follow-up question, is there room for that to happen in the comics industry?
Here's my thought. I do think there's like a more established rule set for comics of like what works and what doesn't. I don't think it hurts that like, I know there are game stores, but when I go into a game store, it's like the hits are all there. You know what I mean? It's like Magic's there, Pokemon's there, D&D's there, Warhammer's there. Just like the tried and tested things are there. And to be honest, like as somebody who is constantly looking for like the next thing, or not the next thing, but is looking for just like different experiences, like those don't appeal to me as much. And I think that's why comics works for me, is because there's almost always something new, right?
Yeah.
Even if there are tried and true methods, or, we're seeing like the nth Batman book come out that people are really excited about. Like there is still like a new take on it, and there is still like new things to explore or new authors, and that is continually coming out. But I think those paths are pretty well cut. I think with the advent of like print on demand through Drive-Thru RPG and itch.io being the two really great distributors for games, those have made self-publishing really easy in a way that comics was not, because those audiences I think are they're just like I don't know, they're there. It's people who are self-organizing games with their friends or designers who like want to read documents that they're really interested in, who are just doing it, I think, for the love of the game. Um, I think it's a frustration with the market of like D&D has swallowed so much attention span and kind of just become this like really big popular thing. I know you're a big D&D guy, and again, I don't mean to like crap on it, but
No.
as somebody who I'm such a contrarian where I'm like, I want to like find something weird and interesting, but I also want it to like help keep me and my life interesting and my sort of perception of self and perception with others interesting. I think games just sort of feeds more of that because you can be like, here's a one-off game that's based on like building a dice tower, and that's all it is. Like my friend Tyler Crumrine, who writes games as Possible Worlds Games, he released a like RPG subscription box, and a lot of his games are like smaller games that hinge on a core mechanic, but they're really fun, unique experiences. And I don't think you get that as much with comics because the goal is to have something run for as long as it needs to or as long as it can, and so you get nice little bites, but you're always kind of waiting for the next thing to come out, or if it gets canceled, there's that sense of just like, well, we're never going to
Finality.
see, yeah, we're never going to see
Yeah.
the story as it was intended. Where a game is like, it's a singular experience that you can do within 2 to 4 hours, and that's all you need to fucking do with it. And if you choose to play it again, great. If you don't, that's also great. But I think that like, there's a little bit more of that ease of consumption that comes along with games that I think makes the idea of like producing something easier. Like all of my games are intended to be playable in a single session, ideally within like 4 to 5 hours maximum.
Right.
You know, where I know people who will do like a friend of mine who play tested Henshin for me, who is not much of a role player, was like, I played D&D once and it was 8 hours of combat. And I was like, that sounds awful.
That's
Like,
a lot.
uh, that's a lot, right? Like, I don't mind. I've had D&D sessions that are like only combat, but I try and limit them to like 2 to 3 hours, right?
Right.
To like keep it flowing and keep try to get to the next sort of story beat. Like, I think combat
And
has
look,
its place, but
it does happen sometimes where just like you think something's going to go super smoothly and then it becomes a slog and everyone's look, I've been guilty, not on purpose, but that's definitely happened to me in the past. But I understand those aren't the memories we build from that. Those aren't the things we spend the next 3 months talking about, at the bar. It's going to be the story stuff in the end.
yeah.
I also wonder, let me think about this, if there is a little more bang for your buck in games, as far as like there's
Hmm.
more appetite to try something out of the blue, right? If I read a comic, to your point, if I read a comic, I'm waiting for the next one. Like once I've read that comic, it is now a physical thing that has taken up space, but has also been finished. I will probably revisit in the same way I'll revisit an old TV show I've watched before. Whereas a game, I could buy the one game and still have a new experience and get more, theoretically, more use out of it. And because of that, I might be more willing to spend money on an unknown property because if it's something that will lead to, multiple stories and multiple adventures and multiple experiences versus the one and done read through, then, and that's not taking anything away from comics, which is also, your bread and butter, but also just like such a great art form and has, captured the imaginations of so many. But it is kind of a lean back, sit and wait for the next one experience, like a slow drip, if you will.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's a very astute observation of just like the the consumption of games really is about I bought something that I can engage with my friends on. And not to say that you can't do that with comics, but comics tends to be a more just like insular reading experience and is something that you're engaging with and is a bit more personal. So they're different experiences, and I think games uh, I mean, frankly, they're just easier to produce as well. I think that's the other part of it is like you don't have to you do have to do some sort of layout, but you can make like, I mean, I have a micro game that is based off of Journey to the West that is like 48 pages, I think, and it took
Wow.
me maybe like a week to put together, and it's just like a dumb little PDF, where I made some grids and plugged some text in there.
Right.
But I know like comics production, having worked in for some major publishers, like it takes a while to get those things out there, and it can take a while to do it yourself as well. And then just going through regular distribution channels or even through crowdfunding, like it's a long process. I think games can be a much shorter process, and so your time to market, and then not to get too businessy, but like your time to market and your ability to see success and see people responding to like a silly idea that you might have is a lot more encouraging, where comics will take a little bit longer to bleed into the market, and you might have trouble going up against some of the other people and like breaking through and getting people to really be like, oh, this is my shit, or reviewing it.
Right.
Games, it's a little easier to put something out there and have people download it and then like give you a rating on itch.io or share a story about like, hey, I ran this and here's the response that it got. um,
Yeah.
I put out, for instance, like I put out, do you know what Sapphire and Steel is or was?
It sounds familiar. I recognize it.
It's a late 70s, early 80s British science fiction property that I watched, and I made a game of kind of based off of it called Elements of
I
Procedure. And I put
believe it
this
was.
out.
I
I
believe it
think I
was
put some
familiar.
extras in there for you.
I
Um,
appreciate that.
but I put I put it out, and it's like I mean, man, like I love the internet because niche communities are like, oh, my thing that nobody talks about, I found something that somebody talked about, where like a
Yes.
bunch of people who love Sapphire and Steel are like, oh, awesome, this is a Sapphire and Steel thing. And I got a guy who played it he like played it and made cutouts of the characters and played it at this like convention, and then like gave me a huge list of feedback. And it was like pretty, for the most part, like positive feedback and actionable feedback. And it's like, oh, this
Great.
is the best outcome of this little experiment that could have ever happened, right? Like, I have one person who knows the source material, who's like, this is kind of specifically targeted for, is like, here's what worked for me, here's what didn't. Now, I'm not going to completely change the game to cater to his taste, but like having any kind of response is great. And that happened like
Yes.
2 weeks after I released it, like
That's
it's
awesome.
great. Yeah.
That's I think one thing that the internet has done very well is show that that niche audiences is a viable audience. I think,
Yeah.
we spend a lot of time, especially on TV and film, where it's all about the lowest common denominator, and we've seen that you can not just make a business, but make a successful business off of niche audiences. And one great way to sometimes target that is through Kickstarter. As someone who is now, you manage outreach within the comics world in general. You've had multiple successful Kickstarter projects under your belt. You both on both the inside and the outside perspective. What goes into a good Kickstarter? What are some of the common factors that leads to success on that platform?
So for me, I mean, what I generally like to tell people is like be specific about what you're producing. And it seems like a pretty common thing. You're like, yeah, no duh. But there are a number of Kickstarters I've seen where they're like, I want to do uh, uh, one guy was like, I want to open up a store, so help me buy a van to open up a comic book shop. And you're like, I'm not entirely sure, like, how does
What's
my
the
purchase
connection?
help you sort of get there, right? Or there was another comic property where they were like, we're doing an anthology book, and every reward was different. None of them really included the anthology book, but it was like, get a sketch from this person, have a consultation with this person. And there's a those projects that have a real lack of clarity and a real lack of like stackability of rewards, for lack of a better term, don't do well because it's hard for people to understand what they could get. You know, like in the Henshin campaigns, you'll see that we have like a PDF in the expansion. We had two different covers. So it was like, get this cover, get both covers. Then you could get a bundle of the original game with one of the books, then a bundle, which I think you got, of all of the games, right? And so there's this natural progression of, as the price point goes up, you get more shit. And that's,
Which also feels very common sense.
right. It does feel very common sense, but I think some people don't always think about it that way. I also think, being clear with people about like the help you need or ways that they can participate. One thing I do in every one of my campaigns is there's some sort of participatory reward, right? Where in the Henshin expansion, we had people be able to submit monster ideas that then Zach Sterling, or artists, rendered and put into the book. And that is a reward where I gave people the opportunity, people who may not, I think the thing I love about Kickstarter is like, oftentimes the backers you get are people who want to be creatives themselves, but may not have the same opportunities or may not have the same like leg up in the way that you have, or they just haven't found it yet. You know what I mean?
Right.
And if you create space for them to participate in some way, you're giving that person a sense of joy. You're giving a person just like a thing that they can point back to, that they're like, I had this level of influence in this way. And whether it's just like building confidence or they use that to move their platform forward, that's outside of my purview. But it is still an opportunity, I think, to engage with a community who really cares about the thing that you're trying to make. And that is really fun and interesting, an aspect in it as well. And then I think the last thing I would say is just like, yeah, be realistic and clear about what you're trying to do. If you're like, hey, I have this series I've always wanted to do, here are the things that I'm interested in, it's going to cost me X amount to print X amount of copies. That's easier for people to like grok and understand and buy into your dream, rather than you trying to pull the wool over their eyes,
Right,
like don't be dishonest about what you're trying to do, and don't try and scam people. You know what I mean? Because people see that shit and people sniff it out and be like, no, I'm not going to help you out. It's very, one thing, I like to joke that like I kickstarted so good that I like got into the company. But one thing I've seen in working at Kickstarter is like the community is so strong and so tight knit, and so supportive of one another, that when a project or a group or an organization comes in that is not in some way like giving back to or participating in that community, they generally are not as positively received as others, right? And I think that's a really important thing to know, is like, if you want to kickstart something, back a couple of projects, see how it works, right? Get a sense for the level of communication that people are putting out, the type of information or that they're putting on their pages, what's working, where do they fail, where do they not fail, where are they successful, look at the comments, what people are talking about. And if you do bring a project to Kickstarter, reach out to some people who are kickstarting, talk to them about their experiences, show your work, give your stuff. I just gave a webinar this morning where I was like, this is going to sound crazy, but like give your shit away if you're just getting started out. We did that with Henshin. We put the initial game, I think I said this earlier, we put the initial game out for pay what you want. We got 2,500 people who got in and gave us their emails. Some people gave us money, but the majority of people, I think like over 80% of the people were like, I'm going to take this for free. And that's okay, but people were aware of it. So then when we did the Kickstarter, a good chunk of those people came back and got the expanded book. And they were like, I have a familiarity with this. I'm excited to sort of see where else this goes.
This has brought me joy. I now am happy to have a physical copy or something on hand.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways to engage with the community, but the core thing, the most important thing to keep in mind is like you have to be authentic and honest and realistic with yourself and with other people about who you are and what you want. Because if you aren't, that you will sort of be the success that you gain or don't gain will become very clear very quickly.
Do you think it helps to have some sort of, I don't want to say proof of concept, but not to be coming in with a completely empty slate? If like I have an idea for this thing, having something to show for your work goes a long way.
Totally. In terms of making games, where I think we were successful with the initial Henshin campaign is like I spent $800 on a videographer to come in, and we had some friends do a like mock session, right? And so we shot them making choices and reacting to each other and having Tim react to them to give people a sense of the flow, right? I do think it's important for people, if you want to crowdfund something, an idea, I do think it is important for you to have a proof of concept to be able to show people, like, A, I have a sense of what I'm doing. Excuse me, I have a sense of what I'm doing. And B, like, they are able to get a sense of what that experience, ultimately what their experience will end up being, because nobody wants to go into something completely blind,
Right. Great. I mean, I feel like I could keep poking and prodding more questions on all these things out of you, but we've already just gotten to the hour mark here, and I'm sure you've got plenty more people to talk to. So, Sam, I'm going to let you go, but before I do, talk to the people. Where can they find you? Where can they reach out to you? Where, if they are interested, can they or will they soon be able to get their copy of Henshin, a Sentai RPG, if they did not back it on Kickstarter?
So if for Henshin and other Cave of Monsters related games, so the company is Cave of Monsters Games. If you go to caveofmonstersgames.com, there is a link that'll take you to our drive-through RPG store. You are able to order print-on-demand copies of Henshin, Rider Khonshu, and 3 Minutes through there, as well as PDF copies of all of our other games. The expansion should be up there before the end of the year for anybody who's interested in picking that up as well. I'm sure I'll figure out some sort of bundle to go with the main game. And if you're interested in hitting me up on Kickstarter, my email is s.kusek, that's Kusek, at kickstarter.com. And I'll be happy to take any questions as they come up. And if you're at any comics conventions, just look for me, try and find me, stop me, say hi, let them know you came through the Kaiju Lounge, and I'll be happy to talk to you.
I love it. This man has more than enough answers for your questions if you're trying to get your stuff off the ground. In the meantime, thank you guys for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe because YouTube. You can follow me at Boss Monster Kaiju everywhere, including Blue Sky, so I no longer have to promote Twitter or X or anything where I can't even use the same handle across the board because it's too many goddamn characters, Elon. Until next time, Sam, thank you so much for being on. Thank you guys for watching. Stay cool, stay hip, stay heavy. Good night.